All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out this evening. My name is William Roca. I am the Director of Programs at Village Preservation. How many of you are members of Village Preservation? Friends, thank you so much. Thank you very much. The rest of you who are not members, shame on you. There are membership sign-up brochures right by the doors, so please take one. And we are a member-based organization. If you're unfamiliar with Village Preservation, thankfully most of you are, but for those of you who are not, we were founded in 1980, and we help protect and highlight the cultural, architectural, and historic spectacular neighborhoods of Greenwich Village, the East Village, and NoHo. We've helped designate 1,250 buildings in our neighborhoods, and we host 75 to 80 free programs like this throughout the year. That is why your membership is so critical. You help make these programs possible. You help make our advocacy work possible. Please go to the website, villagepreservation.org. Check out all the great resources that we have available there. Maps, historic maps where you can build your own walking tours of the neighborhood to learn about all the great buildings and people that have lived in our neighborhoods. All free if you're a member or not. So please go check those resources out. And also go to villagepreservation.org/events, and you can see the rest of our lineup for October. But I'm very excited to introduce this evening's speaker, Kevin Baker. I loved his novel, Paradise Alley, for one. If you have not read it, I highly recommend it. But Kevin is a novelist, historian, and journalist. He's been a professional writer since the age of 13, working originally from the Gloucester Daily Times as a stringer covering schoolboy sports. He's also the co-author of Reggie Jackson's Becoming Mr. October. His work has appeared in Harper's, and he's also been a contributing editor for New York Observer, the New York Times, and the New Republic. And he lives here in New York. Kevin, welcome. It's great to have you.
Thanks very much. How's this? How's this for sound? Good? Thanks very much, William. You're the first New Yorker to pronounce Gloucester correctly in this review. I appreciate it. And thanks so much, Julie, for coming out here to sell books. I'd be happy to sign any books you want to buy afterwards. So first, I thought I would talk for a little while, show a few pictures here, technology permitting, and then answer any questions you might have about the book or baseball or anything. Promise to get you home in time for the vice presidential debate. One of the great inventions of our time, vice presidential debates. Okay, let's see. And to push this forward, what do I push here? Okay. I see. Okay. Terrific. All right, so time to do my Chuck Schumer here. It was always a city game, baseball. For all the efforts to slap a pastoral gloss on the sport, for all the attempts to make it about little boys playing in a cow pasture, only someone unfamiliar with the isolation of American farm life could truly believe that baseball came of age in the country. One of the countless names of the game gives it away. It was called town ball because it was played on those days when everybody came into town for church or market, town being the only place where enough men or boys or women or girls could be assembled for a full nine. Okay, there we go. What we think of as, what we know as baseball today is really an urban game. More precisely, it is the New York game. That's what modern baseball was first called and where it was first played. New York is where its rules were perfected and where we first kept score. New York was where the curveball was devised and the bunts and the stolen base and where the home run came into its own. Just a little bigger than the blue here. New York was where admission was first charged to see a game, and where the very first All-Star game was played, and the first World Championship. It was in New York, too, where the game's color line was finally broken, and the reserve clause was made law, and where a players' league was conceived and died, and where the first modern free agent was signed. It was here that the sports, or any sports, first true superstar emerged, and where the first true baseball stadiums were built. New York was where sports writing reached its zenith, where the first great radio broadcasters plied their trade, and where the first game was televised. It was in New York that the only perfect game in World Series history was pitched, where an expansion team won a World Series for the first time, where 15 World Series were played exclusively within the city limits, or what would become the city limits, and where the World Series was fixed by gamblers, right up in the Ansonia. Baseball is a game that grew up inextricably linked to the pace and the... New York was where the Yankee Clipper came to play, and the Say Hey Kid and the chairman of the board was already here. He had the nickname actually before Sinatra did. Baseball is a game that grew up inextricably linked to the pace, to the customs, and the demands of New York. It was shaped by the challenges and the possibilities the city had to offer, by its inventiveness and its ambitions, its grandiosity and its corruption. For the last 2 centuries, the game's trajectory has followed the city's many rises and declines, its booms and its busts, its follies and its tragedies. That, by the way, is a old New York mayor who made Eric Adams a Piper Piper. The history of baseball, that is to say the received history, is alive from beginning to end, from its creation myth to its rosy models of commerce, community, and fair play. John Thorne tells us in Baseball in the Garden of Eden. The lie begins with where and how it was founded. It is not my intention here to enter the eternal debate over exactly when and where the very first contest involving a bat and a ball took place. Claimants range from Prague to Pittsfield, and just about every burg in between. As David Block makes clear in Baseball Before We Knew It, mankind was probably playing some sort of bat and ball game from the moment we climbed down from the trees and onto the savannah, which we probably noticed would make a great playing field as soon as somebody cut the grass. Ancient murals depict Egyptians with bats playing at something called Sekher Hamat around 2500 BC. Berbers in the 1930s were observed playing Takert O El Mahag, or the ball of the pilgrim's mother, a game one historian theorized was brought to North Africa in the 5th century AD by the Vandals, who were credited as well with inventing the ancient Northern European game of long ball. Medieval Normans played Grand Tech, while their French cousins played La Balle Empoisonnée. The Germans had Schlagball, and the Finns played Passapalo. Don't ask. Countless other bat and ball games evolved under any number of different rules and different names in England. There was hand in and hand out, and wicket and cricket and rounders. There was prisoner's base, or just base. There was tip cat and one old cat. There was feeder and squares and northern spell. There was stool ball and stop ball, or stow ball, and trap ball and tut ball. And there was goal ball, barn ball, sting ball, soap ball, stick ball, and barn ball, and round ball, and town ball, and finally, baseball. The whole welter of English and continental games followed the colonists over to America. Hired Polish laborers were playing long ball in the Jamestown settlement by 1609. On Christmas Day, 1621, Governor William Bradford of the Plymouth colony was enraged to find some of his fellow pilgrims frolicking in ye street at play openly, some at pitching ye bar, some at stool ball and such like sport. At Valley Forge, George Washington was recorded as having taken part in a game of wicket, Here he is seen trying to block home plate with his horse, which was legal then. While Lewis and Clark tried to teach a form of bass to the Nez Perce. Yeah, okay, sound? And small boys wrote later of watching a grown Abe Lincoln join in their games of town ball. This is a cartoon from the 1860 presidential election, which was even more furiously contested than our election today. How long were his strides and how his coattails stuck out behind. Small boys later wrote of him watching him play, and how he tried to hit him with the ball as he ran the bases. He entered into the spirit of play as completely as any of us, and we invariably hailed his coming with delight. The one thing that is clear is that Abner Doubleday had nothing to do with it. This was widely acknowledged even at the time the myth was first propagated by a special baseball commission handpicked by Albert Spaulding of Sporting Goods fame in 1905. Doubleday was sort of the Forrest Gump of the 19th century, a soldier, mystic, and bibliophile with an uncanny ability for being on hand when anything of interest was going on. The first shot of the Civil War, a Confederate cannon blast at Fort Sumter, penetrated the masonry and burst very near my head, he later recalled. And in turn, he aimed the first gun on our side and replied to the attack. He would rise to the rank of Major General, sustain 2 serious wounds, hold the Union line on the first day of Gettysburg, and take the train with President Lincoln back to the battlefield a few months later when the president gave his Gettysburg address. Doubleday read Sanskrit, corresponded with Ralph Waldo Emerson, commanded an all-black regiment of troops, attended seances at the White House with Mary Todd Lincoln. This is not an actual photograph of the seance order. Obtained the first charter for San Francisco's cable cars and served as president of Madame Blavatsky's Theosophical Society. But he did not invent baseball. Nobody really thought he did, even on Spaulding's commission. The commission's chairman, H.E. Mills, had been friends with Doubleday for 20 years, including a period when Mills was president of the National League. A fellow Civil War officer, Mills, had arranged Doubleday's funeral and his burial at Arlington Cemetery, yet for as long and as well as he knew him, Mills admitted he never heard his friend so much as mention baseball. In a brief autobiographical sketch, Doubleday himself wrote that, "In my outdoor sports, I was addicted to," wait for it, topographical work. Apparently Doubleday's anointing as the inventor of baseball had much more to do with the fact that Spaulding and his wife were also theosophists. If true, it's hilarious. It's as if a group of Scientologists had hatched a plot to have Dr. Maysmith replaced by L. Ron Hubbard as the inventor of basketball. Confronted by reporters years later, Mills funked that at least his commission had picked the perfect small town, once again saving baseball from the clutches of the big dirty, corrupting, multi-ethnic city, at least in our national imagination. I submit to you, gentlemen, that if our search had been for a typical American village, a village that could best stand as a counterpart of all villages where baseball might have been originated and developed, Cooperstown would best fit the bill. And so it would, though with all the great stars and the makers and shakers of the game that it honors, not even the charming Baseball Hall of Fame that would arise in that charming American village has ever had the temerity to admit Abner Doubleday. By the 1950s, an alternative foundation myth was set up in Doubleday's place. That is how the game was invented by the New York Knickerbockers Baseball Club. One fine day in 1846, they took the steam ferry over to the Elysian Fields in Hoboken to play the mysterious New York Baseball Club in the very first game of real baseball and lost 23-1. I first read that when I was 8 years old, and I didn't believe it then. The giveaway is that thumping defeat if the Knickerbockers invented the damn game, how do they manage to lose the first one so badly? The truth, of course, is that they weren't the first. The Knickerbockers, as John Thorne puts it, were consolidators rather than innovators, combining and formalizing rules that others were already playing by. Here they are in an early daguerreotype, looking like a bunch of Mennonites out on a toot. The dude with the full beard and the stogie in the lower left is one Daniel Lucius Doc Adams, who has as much right as anyone to be called the father of baseball. He is also not in Cooperstown, even though he was a thoroughly admirable character, the son of an outspoken abolitionist, a graduate of Yale and Harvard, a medical doctor who spent much time treating the poor at New York's northern and eastern dispensaries, that northern dispensary right here in the village. And who considered his marriage the crowning achievement of my life. He was the first shortstop and had the first hardball made after he was exhausted running out to left field to relay throws with the original rubber ball of the sport. It was Doc Adams, as the recording secretary of the Knickerbockers, who went on writing everything down as they and the other teams all over New York and Brooklyn and New Jersey kept revising and improvising, improving the rules of the New York game in the years after the Civil War. So, considering where I am tonight, I thought I would say a few words about the history of baseball in the village. The earliest evidence of independent club play in the city is an account of a game that appeared in several of the city's papers on April 25th, 1823. It referred to a game played the week before outside of Jones's Retreat, a tavern on Broadway between 8th Street and Washington Place. Those two were not depictions of the Jones Retreat with the Grapevine and the Gotham Inn and the Bowery, respectively, but they were typical sporting taverns of the time. The greatest player ever born in the village, anyone? Yes, was the very first baseman, Henry Benjamin Greenberg, who came into this world on New Year's Day, 1911, at 16 Barrow Street, just a few blocks from here. Greenberg was actually spotted first by the great Yankees scout Paul Critchell, who made the mistake of taking him to see the Yankees play in 1929. When Critchell saw how Greenberg was looking at the New York first baseman, a certain Lou Gehrig, he told him, "He's all washed up. In a few years, you'll be the Yankees first baseman." Well, Mrs. Greenberg didn't raise no fools, though, and a few weeks later, Greenberg signed with the Tigers. 2 years later, in Detroit, Greenberg agreed to move to left field to accommodate New York, and found that he rather liked playing the outfield. If he had realized that earlier, he might have been in the same outfield as Joe DiMaggio, which is the sort of thing that haunts us Yankee fans in our infinite greed. I thought I would also say a few words about how I support the same causes that you do here, that I stand with you in trying to preserve what we love best about this city, something that seems to become harder and harder with each passing year. I wrote about this in my last, much shorter book, basically a rant, The Fall of a Great American City, New York and the Urban Crisis of the Affluence. If I can offer another advertisement for myself. One thing I was struck by in doing my research for this book, though, was how closely New York's early baseball teams had to be aligned with the political powers that be in the city, namely Tammany Hall. For many years to play ball in New York, quite literally, you had to have an in with the machine. The first field, actually called the Polo Grounds, was located, anybody with a guess or knowledge?
1/10 to 1/12?
Yes, just off the northeastern tip of Central Park, encompassing 4 square blocks there between what were then 5th and 6th Avenues. Can anyone tell me why it was the Polo Grounds?
Played polo there?
They played polo. It was a polo field owned by one James Gordon Bennett Jr., the flamboyant publisher of the New York Herald. In one of the great scandals of old New York, neither And due to one of the great scandals of old New York, neither Bennett nor anyone else had played polo there after 1877, when the publisher had ruined both his engagement and his tenuous standing in New York society by showing up blind drunk at a party hosted by his fiancée, Miss Caroline May, and urinating into the fireplace. Or a grand piano, depending on which story you heard. Following this performance and a duel fought with Miss May's brother, Bennett would remove himself to Europe for most of the rest of his life. He would not end up marrying until he was 73. But in the meantime, what would he do with his field? Beginning in 1880, John B. Day, a wealthy young tobacco dealer from Connecticut, rented it out for use by the two different major league teams he owned. One of them, the New York Gothams, later the Giants of the National League, and the other, the OG 19th-century New York Mets in the American Association, also just Metropolitan, no S. Thanks to his Tammany connections, Day was able to fend off many threats to extend the Manhattan street grid through the middle of his new ball field. He did this mostly by handing out free season tickets to the Board of Aldermen. So up went the first polo grounds, a two-story wooden grandstand and bleachers, an ordinary low minor league ballpark by today's standards, but as large and lavish a major league stadium as existed at the time. There, on September 29, 1880, the Mets, or Met, played their first game, defeating the Washington Nationals 8-3 behind the pitching of Hugh Ignatius One-Arm Daly. One-Arm Daly, who had lost his left hand in a shooting accident, would, appropriately enough, go on to become the first major league pitcher to throw back-to-back one-hitters. Soon, the National League Gothams took over the finished diamond at the southeast corner of the polo grounds, while Day went about installing the Metropolitans in the southwest corner, hastily throwing up a new set of grandstands and bleachers there. As you can see from this readily accessible map of the time, he had immediate success at the box office with a crowd of over 15,000, including former President Grant, mobbing the southeast field to see the Gothams play and win their home opener. Unlikely as it may sound, it would not be the last time two different teams in two different leagues occupied one field called the Polo Grounds. The crowds kept coming. Day proved himself a tireless promoter, staging such stunts as having heavyweight boxing champion John L. Sullivan pitch an exhibition game for the Metropolitans, but problems with his ballpark arrangement soon became apparent. The Mets corner of the Polo Grounds was in awful condition. The diamond leveled off in part with landfill that proved to be raw garbage. The resourceful Day found his American Association entry their own Metropolitan Park the next season, located between 107th and 109th Streets along the East River. They can be seen here in another meticulously drawn map. I could not find any surviving picture of this, apparently because the place was so awful. It looked great at first sight, a scenic waterfront stadium with ready access from both the 2nd and 3rd Avenue elevated lines and the Harlem Steamboat Company, yet Day turned out to have an unerring nose for garbage. Metropolitan Park was built over an old city dump and just across the river from Astoria factories that pumped foul smoke into the faces of the fans. According to the New York World, the park was decidedly unpleasant to the olfactory organs. And Mets pitcher Jack Lynch claimed that a player might go down for a grounder and come up with 6 months of malaria. Plainly, Day considered the Metropolitans a poor stepchild to his National League investment. The team was run on such a limited budget that it resorted to stealing bats from opposing teams when they weren't looking. After the 1885 season, Day ended his little experiment in dual ownership altogether, a sad fate for the Mets, but one that ensured that a major league team at one time or another would play at every borough in what would become the city of New York. Day lobbed the team off on one Erastus Wyman, who ran both the Staten Island Ferry and a primitive amusement park in Richmond County. Wyman plunked the Mets down in the middle of his park on the grounds of the old St. George Cricket Club and included the price of admission in his round-trip ferry ticket for fans coming over from Manhattan. Yet Erastus Wyman, in that spring and summer of 1886, could offer his patrons something even better. From his ferry and from the top rows of his ballpark, fans could watch the workmen as they went about raising the Statue of Liberty on Bedloe's Island. Alas, even Lady Liberty did not prove to be enough of an attraction, and at the end of the 1887 campaign, the Mets quietly folded. They would be back. Later that year, the city's success finally succeeded in driving 111th Street through James Gordon Bennett Jr.'s former playground. It's unclear what happened, if maybe the aldermen did not get their free tickets that summer or what. Forced to search for a new park, Day took his Giants out to Jersey City for a couple of games and over to the St. George Cricket Grounds. The cricket grounds have been used for outdoor theater the year before, leaving it mostly devoid of grass and stage scaffolding remaining on part of the field. Heavy rains left the outfield so waterlogged that the Giants were forced to lay down wooden planks for their outfielders to clatter across them in pursuit of fly balls. Picture a world champion Major League team today trying to play in Turtle Pond behind Central Park's Delacorte Theater. Yet Day retained his knack for sniffing out the most marginal fringes of the metropolis for his ball teams. Now his nose led him from a grassless swamp in Staten Island to a part of Manhattan that had been underwater just 15 years earlier. This would become the Polo Grounds of blessed memory, where during the season of the Players' League in 1890, you again had two different teams playing. Some 13 years after that, the American League came to town, giving in to what was frankly the extortion efforts of Tammany Hall. The new league handed construction of the team's stadium and its ownership over to people well connected to the machine. The primary owners were Frank Farrell, who was then proprietor of the House of the Bronze Door downtown and probably the biggest gambling kingpin in the country, and Big Bill Devery, undoubtedly the most corrupt chief of police the city ever had, which is saying something. Lincoln Steffens said Devery was a wonderful character, but he had about as much business being chief of police as the fishman had running the aquarium. The new park was built up in Washington Heights, where Columbia Presbyterian is today, by one Thomas McAvoy, a police inspector and assembly district leader, whose sole claim to morality was that on the job he absolutely would not take whore money. His stadium, known as Hilltop Park, or the Rock Pile, stretched 365 feet to left field, 400 feet to right, and an endless 542 feet to dead center. Sporting Life described the undeveloped site as one without a level spot 10 feet square on the whole property. Baseball historian Glenn Stout describes the rest of the field as a barren, rocky outcrop, dotted with massive boulders and dead trees and cleaved by deep gullies. A fetid pond ran the length of the eastern side. McAvoy's contractors dealt with this mainly by dumping tons of landfill into the site, most of it sunk. By opening day, April 30th, 1903, there was grass only in the infield, and the sun reflected so brightly off the baked earth and rocks that fans complained they were blinded by the glare. Paul's here just to notice, see those buildings out there in kind of toward left field? And here they are again. They are still there today. They're part of Columbia Presbyterian now, but they still exist today. At the time, they were apartments and were used by a Yankees manager to help steal signs. But they remain. Neither the roof nor the bleachers were finished by opening day, and thousands of fans were forced to stand behind a rope in the outfield. The pond had been transformed into a gaping crater in right field that would charitably be referred to as a hollow. Finally, after the 1912 season, the city again drove a street through the rock pile, and the New York Highlanders, or Yankees, moved into the Polo Grounds as tenants, where they remained until they managed to build a ballpark of their own in the Bronx. The city's ball teams went on being connected to the machine for years to come. Much to their detriment, the Giants, above all, were thoroughly Tammany's team and run much like an old political clubhouse. Their owner in the 1920s, Charles Stoneham, was a thoroughly corrupt bucket shop operator on Wall Street who may actually have murdered a couple of elderly women for their money, and was a close friend of Arnold Rothstein, who fixed the 1919 World Series. Even Jacob Rupert, the transformational owner of the Yankees, seen here right next to Charles Stoneham's son, the notorious Horace Stoneham, he began to pull the team away from the machine's orbit and turned American sports into an industry that could stand on its own, had put in 8 years as a Tammany congressman on the Upper East Side. Here he is with Mr. Walker again. Certainly the machine was corrupt to its core and had put New York baseball at a nexus with exploitive politics and organized crime. As such, it had a great deal to do with the city losing both the Giants and the Dodgers. Yet, it seems to me that the city learned the wrong lesson from that event. Ever since we have been pouring completely unwarranted public subsidies into the 6 separate facilities we have for 9 major league teams in the big 4 professional sports in the metropolitan area, a number sure to keep growing with the advent of men's and women's soccer, women's basketball, and who knows, maybe pickleball. Here's Horace Stoneham, much older, and Walter O'Malley, the 2 whiz kids who led those teams out to California. There's a typical pickleball part. With these subsidies, we've given our sports teams pretty much carte blanche to do what they want, and as a result, have lost some of our most beloved former parks, and even, in the ultimate crime, the original Penn Station, sacrificed for the awful and apparently eternal Madison Square Garden. To give you one example of this, for their most recent stadium, the Yankees received some $1.2 billion in public subsidies and tax breaks. It was the second heavily subsidized stadium the Steinbrenner family alone had received. By contrast, Colonel Rupert built the original Yankee Stadium in the space of 11 months for about $2.5 million, about $44 million today, all in his own money. And while that original stadium reached an eventual maximum capacity of 82,000, today's Yankee Stadium 3 seats a little over 47,000. In other words, we've got rid of about an entire Fenway Park's worth of seats for regular fans in the interest of putting in more luxury boxes and suites. It is much the same for all our other stadiums and arenas. Despite maximum public subsidies, it is harder and more expensive than ever for an average New Yorker to see a game anywhere, even on television. This is the sort of massive giveaway to privileged special interests that have become all too common in all facets of our city today. All too much what we have become. Thank you. So thanks for listening to me in my soapbox there. Any questions? Yeah, sir.
Yeah, could you talk about the remnants of the wall in Nuance?
Oh, I just talked about almost anything.
I've heard it rumored that there were remnants of a ballpark there.
Yes, it is still supposed to be part of one of the second Washington Park there, which the Dodgers played in under one of their many names. The amazing thing about Casey Stengel, he not only played for or managed the Dodgers, Giants, Yankees, and Mets, but also played not only in Ebbets Field, the Polo Grounds, and managed in Yankee Stadium, and managed in Shea Stadium, but also played in Washington Park. That's how long his career lasted in New York, off and on. So,
Where was Washington Park used as a ball field?
It was until they built Ebbets Field, which was in 1913, I think it opened, 1912 or 1913. Until that, it was used, and it went on being used by the Brooklyn Tip Tops. Anybody know who they are? They played in the short-lived Federal League, and they were owned by the owner of Tip Top Bread, who named the team. So they lasted a couple of years. So that was the end of Washington Park after about 1950.
So I don't know if you can get into this, but I can't believe when I look back at what Babe Ruth did, just in terms of home run hitting, how he completely dominated, and he hit more home runs than teams did.
Yes.
And I can never, despite reading, I can't fathom how he was so far ahead in hitting so powerfully so often. What was his secret? What was he doing that nobody else could do?
It's very interesting. People have been trying to figure that out to this day. I mean, I think he's the most transformational athlete in history. Obviously, more people know who Muhammad Ali is around the globe, or Michael Jordan, or Messi, but Ruth really brought baseball into the big time. When he came to the Yankees, when the time and the man and the place was met, the Yankees became the first club ever to draw over 1 million fans. I mean, to give you an idea, he was sold by Frazee, the owner of the Red Sox, because he could make a lot more money on Broadway.
That's what I read.
The baseball made about the same money as the sheet music business in those days. So he just completely transformed it. But people, they actually examined him in a medical school. They thought he had slightly faster twitch muscles, but nothing quite. He really changed the ball from the dead ball game to the lively ball by aping this swing of Brother Matthias at this enormous friar at the sort of orphanage that he was put away in, even though he wasn't an orphan. So he was maybe up, that uppercut, aping that, but still it seems incredible.
Yeah.
And how before that he was the first, he was the greatest left-handed pitcher in the game at the time, and regularly beat the greatest right-handed pitcher, Walter Johnson. So how, it's like, I think about it as if like Michael Jordan had been like a dominant center, and then became like the greatest guard ever, and it just changed the whole sport. It's become kind of fashionable to denigrate his feats and the game then. I read some quote the other day from Adam Ottavino saying how he would take Babe Ruth every time if he pitched against him. I do wish, as a Yankees fan, and I'm sure all Mets fans will join me, that Adam Ottavino concentrated more on trying to retire batters today than 100 years ago. But the thing is, pitchers throw a bigger variety of pitches today. They throw harder today. On the other hand, no batter today has ever faced any kind of fastball without a batting helmet and body armor. And Ruth, you could get killed in the old game. A man was the one guy killed at Major League Field. Ray Chapman was killed at the Polo Grounds in a game where Ruth was playing. So this was sort of but that's one of the great things about baseball. The athletes are at least comparable enough in size so that you can debate this stuff endlessly. So maybe Adam Ottavino would strike out Babe Ruth today. Give Ruth a year of modern training and conditioning. Let him have his pick of new bats, modern bats. Ruth had like a 54-ounce bat. It was like waving a piece of lumber. Let him pick a modern bat out, put a helmet on his head and some body armor on him, and I think I would bet on him against Mr. Ottavino, but in any case. But it's fun to debate. Yeah. Yes.
What was the real story behind why the Dodgers and the Giants left? Was it the city's failure to build stadiums? I mean, that's the myth or the story that I always heard.
Well, this has become interesting, what debate it is now. Now, first of all, I'll preface that by saying this book goes through 1945.
Oh, okay.
But the second book is written and will be out in the spring of 2026. Jackie Robinson is on the cover, and I go into that debate in some depth.
So we'll save it.
And it's kind of come down to between was it Walter O'Malley's fault, or was it Horace Stonham's fault, or was it Robert Moses' fault? Which is kind of like King Kong versus Godzilla and Megalon, New York's gallery of villains. I'll just say this for now, that like, nobody gave any subsidy, part of the point I'm trying to make, that nobody gave any subsidies to ball teams to stay. That was considered unheard of. You know, and O'Malley, when he was denied what he wanted from Moses, suggested that the city use Title I, you know, the urban, you know, the slum clearance program the feds had, which would have been tearing down about 100 blocks of housing, much of it beloved brownstone Brooklyn. So in many ways, the Dodgers moving was a bullet the city dodged. But anyway, I'll leave it at that for now. But yeah, it's you know, this is revisionist history, and as much as I hate to excuse Robert Moses for anything, I think the real villains were those two nimbobs we saw before, you know, Stone and O'Malley. Yeah.
I don't know if you talk about this in this book or the next one, but during World War II when the women were playing,
Yeah.
where in New York were the women's teams
Well,
playing?
that's the sad thing, and that's one thing I was really disappointed in. There was no New York team
Wow.
in the All-American Girls Baseball League. I think that was the professional girls baseball league. It was all Midwest.
Okay.
So that was a bummer. I kind of wanted to write about it, but you know, I do write somewhat in this book, and also again in the second book about Effa Manley, who is the one woman in the Baseball Hall of Fame, and she was the owner of the Newark Eagles, who were a so-called Negro League team there, and very interesting person, wonderful personality. And that's, you know, that's a big story in here too. It's not just the major leagues, but also, you know, democratizing as baseball was, from a very early time, the color line was drawn. And even John Montgomery Ward, who a New Yorker who started the Players League and rebelled against the majors and almost killed both of the existing major leagues, he wanted to integrate baseball then in 1890. And his fellow players, although labor radicals, said no. And so this was a horrible thing. And segregation is, discrimination is, it's the, you know, horrible part of the American experience. Although I hope also an inspiring one, because black players and black owners and things, they kind of made a way where there was no way. And really played some fantastic baseball, played it as well as or better than the white players in the majors, and finally forced their way back into the major leagues with Jackie Robinson, who's on the cover of the second book. But so that story is here too, as well. It's not forgotten. Yeah, sir, sorry.
So I was sitting there, you know, you're a book of knowledge when it comes to baseball, and you probably know about all the great players.
Thank you. I make it all up.
Do you have any comment about Ohtani on the Dodgers?
Yeah, it's very interesting. Well, this is one of the reasons why it's become fashionable to denigrate Babe Ruth, because Major League Baseball now is really pushing Shohei Ohtani as the greatest ever. And he's the fantastic ball player. I mean, he has DH'd all this year. I think if there had been a DH in Babe Ruth's time, he'd still be playing. But and he was never, even when he was pitching, nearly the pitcher Ruth was. But you know, he's an incredible player. One big thing that's a little scary here. One of the things Ruth did coming to New York when he did, it had just been the 1919 Black Sox scandal, the fixed World Series, and baseball was in real danger of turning into something like professional wrestling. And Ruth, you know, they clamped down on the gambling and threw those players out. But also Ruth came in there. Now MLB is looking to Ohtani as their new savior. And, you know, I think there's more than we've learned so far about that gambling. I have trouble believing that he put an account of $16 million under the complete control of his translator. Maybe so, but
He's a phenom.
oh, he's an amazing player, but I worry that he's going to get involved. And I think baseball and all these professional sports are crazy to let the devil back in the room. to let to embrace gambling as thoroughly as they have. I think they think, because, you know, and now with Pete Rose just dead too, I think they think because with as much as players make, it's not going to happen. Nobody's going to endanger that. Gambling is a compulsion. People don't do it because it's very rational. And there are a lot of people around the game who don't make all that much money. Umpires and clubhouse attendants, all kinds of other people. So I think they're playing with fire in this. And I hope Otani is not more deeply involved, but some player is going to be at some point. And it's a mistake.
Thank you.
Yeah, you had a...
Why do you think it took the Yankees so long to have an integrated team?
Oh, they took the Yankees so long to have a great team because...
Integrated.
Oh, an integrated team. Oh, the Yankees, and believe it or not, there were 3 other teams, I think, the Red Sox, Tigers, and Phillies, were integrated after the Yankees. A lot of these, but this is mostly because of the otherwise very brilliant, curmudgeonly guy who was ran the Yankees for many years, George Weiss, and he was convinced that fans, white fans, did not want to see black ball players. Or at least, you know, that's what he told himself and told them. And so he refused to sign any. So the first black New York Yankee was
Howard.
Elson Howard, which was like something like 8 years after Jackie Robinson came up. But yeah, it was you know, which was really terrible. Weiss was fired rather abruptly by the Yankees after the 1960 season and went home to his very lively and vivacious wife, who soon after remarked that I married George for better or worse, but not for lunch. And soon after, he was back running the Mets, the new Mets team. Where for some reason he proved to be less of a racist, but it's, you know, it's a terrible thing. A lot of these teams were very racist, and, you know, they were so mercenary about it. By the time Robinson comes in, 15 of them vote against integration, mostly because they're making money from black teams playing in the parks when they're on the road. So, and unfortunately, the commissioner, Happy Chandler, overrode them. But yes,
I saw Jackie Robinson play in Ebbets Field.
that's great.
And Dixie Walker was the culprit on the Dodgers who refused to play with the black.
Oh yeah, Dixie Walker would not shake hands with Robinson, would not have anything to do with him.
Pee Wee Reese came out of the dugout and embraced Jackie Robinson.
Yes, yeah.
And that was what changed the whole attitude of all the fans.
Yeah, the Dodgers tried to, a bunch of the players tried to kind of rebel at spring training, and they were told in no uncertain terms that they would go, not Robinson. And Walker was traded off to the Pittsburgh Pirates for, I believe, Preacher Row. So it didn't do the Dodgers any worse. Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering what your process is for writing.
Oh, this is a life. This is a labor of love, a lifetime of.
Why should you research so much?
Boy, I already researched a lot about New York and all these periods from the series of historical novels I'd written. Paradise Alley, as Wayne was kind enough to mention, and also Dreamland and Stryber's Row and The Big Crowd. So I knew a lot of that, and from years of just writing about it in general, the city. And baseball, I've been following again since the age of 8. So.
And you were always a Yankee fan?
Yes, I was a Yankee. I started rooting for the Yankees in 1966
Where did you
when
live?
they finished last. That was in, we were living in Tenafly, New Jersey.
Oh.
We then moved to Massachusetts during the impossible dream summer of 1967. I probably would have become a Red Sox fan, but my classmates called my favorite ball player Mickey Mantle, and I could not stomach that insult. I stayed a Yankees fan. Yeah, sir.
A little offbeat, let's,
Sure.
something like tying in with gambling. Now that he's gone, posthumously into the Hall of Fame or not?
Oh.
Because there's a lot of, you know, the people who were there are not paragons of virtue, many of them
Right.
got elected. And if you look at just his accomplishments on the field
Right.
player. He belongs in, but, there's the big but, and, you know, he's not a good man, or a philanderer, a gambler, obviously gambler. Does it make a difference whether you're betting on your team or against your team?
Well, that's the thing, and that's why he kind of excused himself. Oh, I never bet against the Reds. Even, you know, he was the manager of the Reds.
Right.
So you have a big bet down, you could easily put in some, you know, overworked young pitcher
Sure.
and wreck his arm, wreck his career.
Right.
So, yeah, I think baseball is right to make gambling a big red line. But it's hard now that they so embrace it.
Well, that's the thing, you see the big ads, and
Yeah.
you have the little tiny disclaimer, you
Yeah.
gotta have your binoculars on, and say, oh, by the way, don't get too involved with gambling.
Yeah.
And it bothers me, like you said too, it just,
If you have a gambling problem, call this number.
right, exactly, that's what I'm saying. That's disgusting.
And you know, I love watching SNY, the
Right.
sports stuff, but they have, you know, they actually discuss the odds. They discuss what the best bet is.
Right.
You know, all these places, I mean, you know, so John Thorne makes the great point that gambling had a huge amount to do with baseball professionalizing. Because at the time, Americans, and then as now, bet on anything. American men bet constantly on all kinds of things. In baseball, a series of discrete acts and at-bats and stuff really led itself to that. But I think for the sport and all these sports to embrace it is a mistake. And it does become hypocritical if you're keeping people like Pete Rose or Joe Jackson, who, you know, helped throw the 1919 World Series, but set a series record of hit for hits. It's not clear if he even, you know, had really decided to go along with this. It seems weird to take, you know, to keep them out of the hall. But the hall is so crazy. I mean, their complete inability to deal with the juicers, which is now seems to have come down to like guys who are nice to the sports writers in the clubhouse can get in. You know, like Big Papi gets in, but not Manny Ramirez. You know, both juicers, both, you know, all these guys. You know, nobody liked A-Rod, so he's not in there. But if you make the Hall of Fame a popularity contest, there'll be about 5 people in there. It'll be like Stan Musial and, you know, and Phil Rizzuto and Jackie Robinson, you know. Yeah, sir.
So I just have so you know you wrote this book and focused on the New York game and you emphasized that
Yeah.
New York was sort of the hub of early baseball. But looking at the senior circuit, I mean the surviving team is the Cincinnati.
Yeah.
So what was it about Cincinnati that allowed it to last so long as opposed to the New York clubs?
Oh, well, what happened was the Cincinnati, you know, a lot of these teams were professional under the table, and that was considered very shocking. But the New York area was really the hub of that New York game, unsurprisingly. It outlasted things like the Massachusetts game, where you got guys out by hitting them with the ball, or the Philadelphia game. The city of Cincinnati decided to recruit many of the best only one of the original Red Stockings, who went on a 130-game unbeaten streak, was from Cincinnati. Almost everybody else was from New York or Brooklyn or the surrounding areas, including the main stars. So they recruited them to Cincinnati by paying them huge sums, like $600, even $1,200 a year, and sent them on this barnstorming tour, and they won everywhere, and finally came to Brooklyn and had a big dramatic match against the Brooklyn Atlantic, so which is in the book as well. So, when they finally lost and they were like 130-1, the good people of Cincinnati lost all interest in them, and the team moved to Boston, become the first Boston Red Stockings, and. So it's like even Yankees fans, I think, would settle for 130-1, but not Cincinnati in 1870. So that was.
So the team in Cincinnati now is not the original team.
No, but that's the sort of the same. That's what Reds comes from,
Okay.
and it used to be honored by they got to play first,
Right.
you know, in the major leagues. So that's kind of gone by the boards, but it still has that connection.
Okay.
So, yeah, sir.
You've already mentioned this, but I just don't see how Blue could stack up against today's pitching. With all the pitches they have, sliders and change-ups and fork balls and the speed that they throw the ball at. I mean, really,
Yeah, they're.
The athletes today, I mean, the population growth, the population increase, athletes today, this is 100 years later.
Oh,
They're
sure.
so much better than athletes, but even in the 1950s.
Sure.
There's no comparison between the athletes, the baseball players today, and even the 50s.
Yeah, they're still an amazing, I mean, look at, yeah, it's true, it's guys like Mays or Mickey Mantle kind of dwarfed by Aaron Judge. On the other hand, a lot of these athletes were much more durable than these guys now. These guys get injured constantly.
Yeah.
The pitchers get injured
Yeah.
constantly
Yeah.
because they're throwing too hard on every pitch, and they're throwing nobody can learn how to pitch the contact. Also, though, give those players of that time, look at people like Honus Wagner, who's a pretty big guy. Look at Ruth, look at some of the best players of that time. You give them a little time with modern training methods and with a modern bat, you know.
No.
Also,
Yes.
nobody today faces an emery ball. Nobody today faces a spitball. Nobody today faces a baseball in the dust that's been used for the entire game. And it's kind of falling apart.
And no one takes trains to every game.
Yeah, no one takes, you know, that's the thing.
No, that's real.
Our 27-hour train rides
Mm.
worse than flying over 3 time zones? It's an interesting question. No, I think there'd be a lot of athletes who, I doubt if Ruth today would hit 340 lifetime. On the other hand,
No chance.
well, look in the book about how much shorter all the fences are
I'm
today.
not sure you can make double A ball today. I'm serious.
Well, good. Well, good. It's great to think that you've seen the greatest time of game. Yeah.
This will be our
I
last
think
question.
it's an exercise, a futile exercise to compare
Any sport.
any player in one era to another. It's a completely fruitless comparison.
I think it's a lot of fun and a lot more fun than our political discourse.
A lot of things are a lot of fun that are fruitless, so this is every one of them.
So.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.